Hello my friends, Truex31 here again. I want to talk to you a little bit today about a problem call I keep getting, and that call is, my radiant heating isn't working. What's wrong? So I go out on the job site and I look around and I see something like this. Tubing installed under the joist cavity, insulation, tubing is free hung, everything seems to be pretty normal. Now, that can work in some places, but it doesn't work so good in cold climates. So I just want to run some numbers by you and have a look at why that's not working. So I have a structure here, 800 square foot structure, and we're going to build that identical structure in 3 different cities. Okay, the first one being Toronto. Now, given the environmental conditions in Toronto, I know that the heat load for that structure would be 10,800 BTUs per hour. That, of course, is on the coldest day of the year. Now, if you do the math, we find out that we require a 76 degree floor surface temperature. We've talked about that before. Now, if I take the identical same construction, move it to, let's say, Calgary, a little bit warmer in Calgary, so the load becomes, a little bit colder in Calgary, of course, the load becomes 13,600. Do math again, that's 78 degrees Fahrenheit floor surface temperature. Now, if we were to build that same structure in Regina, where it's always balmy, we're looking at 16,000 BTUs an hour, or an 80 degree floor surface temperature. Okay, so that's all not completely unreasonable. It's certainly doable. Now you got to look at water temperatures. So I did the math on the water temperatures. I'm not going to show you how to do the math, it's just a given. But in Toronto I found out that the floor had to be 135 degrees Fahrenheit to get that surface temperature of 76. Now that is quite a high number. So why is that? Well, you have to understand heat transfer. There's 3 types of heat transfer. There's convection, conduction, and radiation. So convection would be your furnace blowing hot air throughout the house. Not very efficient, not very comfortable. That's convection. Conduction, you reach into the engine of your car, touch something hot, or maybe a hot pan on the stove. That's conduction. And then there's radiation. You're standing in the sunlight, you feel nice and warm, you walk into the shade, you cool off. That's radiation. So, taking that into consideration, I found out we needed 135 in Toronto. Now, because the floor is a little hotter in Calgary, that number becomes 152. And in Regina, of course, colder yet, the number is 165. And this is where the problem lies. You need very hot water to achieve that 80 degree floor surface temperature. Now what happens? The installer has been taught that radiant heat runs very efficiently and inexpensively at low temperature. So what does he do? He puts a tempering or a mixing valve of some sort on the system, and he tempers that water down to 125 degrees. Well, at 125 degrees you can never achieve the desired surface temperature of 80 degrees for the vast part of the winter, that is. You need to have 80, you need to have 165 to reach the surface temperature of 80 to meet the BTU load, correct? So why is it so hot? Now, go back to the installation method. Remember, the tubing is suspended in the joist space, insulation below, okay? Now when you look at that scenario, well, convection is a very small portion of it. You only have a 2 or 3 inch gap here down the joist cavity, and convection is really irrelevant. And unfortunately, because the tubing is hung in free space, conduction, there is no conduction. It's totally irrelevant. All we're left is radiant. And radiant has to be, we have to run very hot water to get the underside of the floor hot enough to meet the resistance of the floor and get that temperature we want here. Right? Because think of it, floor covering, the more floor covering you put on top of the tube, the more resistance you're creating. It's just like adding insulation to the wall. So the thicker this floor is, the hotter this point needs to be to get the proper point here. Okay, so what can you do? Well, what you need to do in cold climate like Saskatchewan is add heat transfer plates. Okay, you would put 2 down each joist cavity, screw them to the underside of the floor, snap your tubing in this little groove here, and away you go. So what you've effectively done, you've brought the conductiveness back into the equation. The tubing, the fluid in the tubing, the fluid conducts to the tubing conducts to the heat transfer plate, the heat transfer plate spreads that heat across the floor, conducts it to the underside of the floor, allows you to do a much lower water temperature. So what's the actual effect on that? Well, by adding heat transfer plates, you can reduce your water bleed considerably. Toronto becomes 102, Calgary 111, and Saskatchewan 118. And that is certainly an achievable number for any radiant floor heating system. So, when someone wants to install radiant in your house, I hope you want to install radiant in your house, know what it is they're going to sell you, understand the science behind it, and you'll be able to make an informed decision. So, until next time, thanks for watching.